The scent of aged paper, crushed leather, and dried lavender always hung like a protective sanctuary around my 10-year-old daughter, Catherine. For her, the small room at the end of our hallway wasn't just a bedroom. It was a living museum, a sacred vault preserving the memory of her late grandfather, Arthur. Before his passing, my father-in-law had been a dedicated scholar of antiquarian texts, a man who spent his life tracking down rare, first-edition volumes from the hidden corners of Europe. When he closed his eyes for the last time, he didn't leave behind stocks, real estate, or gold. He left Catherine his crowning achievement, a collection of 32 perfectly preserved historical texts. Among them were leather-bound volumes from the late 18th century, their gilded edges catching the soft morning sunlight like captured pieces of ancient gold. Catherine possessed a maturity that completely defied her age, spending her weekends gently handling the fragile pages with white cotton gloves, her small fingers tracing the faded typography. She knew the history of every binding, the origin of every map hand-colored by long-dead cartographers, and the deep, rich smell of the cotton rag paper that had survived centuries of human chaos. That collection was her anchor, her living connection to a grandfather who had recognized her quiet, brilliant mind and promised her that books were windows into the soul of history. I watched her from the doorway, her small head bowed over a beautifully restored botanical text from 1792, her devotion so pure it filled me with an intense sense of protective pride. I had no idea that within 48 hours, the deep peace of our sanctuary would be shattered by a criminal act born of pure, predatory greed. The nightmare began on a crisp autumn Monday, just hours after I returned from a weekend corporate accounting seminar in Chicago. I had left Catherine under the care of my parents, Richard and Eleanor Caldwell, trusting them to maintain the quiet routine of our household while I was away. The moment I crossed the threshold of my home, a strange, suffocating silence greeted me, an empty chill that immediately made the hairs on my arms stand up. I walked down the hallway to Catherine's room and found her sitting on the edge of her bed, her small frame trembling violently as silent tears streamed down her pale face. Her white cotton gloves were clutched tightly against her chest, and her eyes were fixed on the built-in mahogany bookshelves lining the far wall. The shelves were entirely bare, the deep shadows where the rare books once rested looking like open wounds in the dim light of the afternoon. "Mommy, they took them," Catherine whispered, her voice cracking into a ragged sob that tore through the quiet room like a physical blade. "Grandma and Grandpa came with heavy boxes while I was at school, and they took every single one of Papa Arthur's books." A wave of white-hot fury threatened to consume my mind, but my professional training as a forensic auditor instantly overrode the panic, hardening my thoughts into a razor-sharp focus. I held my daughter close, kissing her forehead, my voice deadly quiet as I spoke into the heavy silence. "I will get them back, Catherine. I swear to you on my life that I will bring them home." I didn't waste time with desperate text messages or frantic phone calls. I immediately got into my car and drove directly to my parents' upscale suburban home. When I burst through their front door, I found Richard and Eleanor sitting in their formal dining room, a bottle of expensive champagne open on the table between them. "Where are my daughter's books, Richard?" I demanded, my voice level, cold, and entirely devoid of the familiar deference they had spent a lifetime extracting from me. My mother, Eleanor, took a slow, elegant sip of her champagne, her face instantly arranging itself into a mask of practiced, condescending pity. "Oh, Renee, don't be so dramatic and hysterical," Eleanor said, waving her hand dismissively as if I were a child throwing a minor tantrum over a misplaced toy. They were just old, dusty books sitting on shelves, doing absolutely nothing for our family's immediate financial security. "Your father and I encountered an unexpected liquidity crisis, and we made an executive decision to liquidate an asset that was technically family property anyway. We sold the collection to a private broker on Saturday morning, and you should be thanking us for clearing out that useless clutter from your house." I stared at my parents, the absolute lack of shame in their features revealing the terrifying depth of their entitlement and total disregard for my daughter's heart. "You stole from a 10-year-old child," I said, my voice dropping an octave, echoing through the elegant dining room with a chilling authority that made my father shift uncomfortably. "You stole her inheritance, her grandfather's legacy, and you did it behind my back. How much did you sell them for?" I asked, stepping closer to the table, my eyes locking onto the bank deposit slip casually resting near my father's champagne flute. Richard cleared his throat, pulling the slip toward him, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips as he leaned back in his leather chair. $165,000, Renee, he said proudly, as if he had just executed a brilliant corporate merger. "And before you threaten to call the local police, remember that Arthur was my brother-in-law, and there is no written contract proving those books belonged exclusively to Catherine. It's our money now, and we've already deployed it to protect the family legacy from a temporary setback, so I suggest you go home and buy Catherine a nice digital tablet to replace them." A normal person would have broken down in tears, but as I memorized the numbers on that deposit slip, a profound realization began to surface within my analytical mind. A simple liquidity crisis didn't require a sudden, secretive weekend robbery of a child's bedroom to secure exactly $165,000. My parents had spent decades maintaining an illusion of extreme wealth, driving luxury vehicles, and living in a mansion funded by high-interest personal loans and mysterious investment circles. They believed that because I was their daughter, I would always protect their social status and swallow my own grief to preserve the image of family unity. They completely underestimated my memory, my resources, and more importantly, they completely underestimated the absolute power of a mother whose child had been wounded. I didn't scream, and I didn't reach across the table to smash their expensive champagne glasses. I simply turned around and walked out of their house into the cold evening air. The moment I returned to my office, I locked the door, pulled up my secure professional network terminals, and initiated a relentless, forensic investigation into my parents' financial affairs. As a senior corporate compliance auditor, I possessed access to advanced tracking databases and institutional networks that normal investigators could only dream of utilizing. I began by tracking the exact routing number listed on the bank deposit slip my father had carelessly left visible on the dining room table. The paper trail didn't lead to a standard mortgage payment or a luxury vehicle lease. It led directly to a hidden, high-security corporate escrow account. As I dug deeper into the corporate registration files, a massive, dark plot twist began to unfold before my eyes with terrifying, undeniable clarity. My parents did not just recklessly sell the rare books for quick cash to cover a standard debt or luxury lifestyle lapse. They had used the $165,000 to cover up their personal involvement in a fraudulent, predatory multi-level marketing scam that was on the verge of collapsing. For 3 years, Richard and Eleanor had been the regional directors of an illegal pyramid scheme masquerading as a premium wellness and estate planning syndicate for seniors. They had targeted vulnerable, elderly retirees in our community, convincing them to liquidate their life savings and invest in worthless shell companies that promised impossible returns. My parents had been skimming millions from the top of the pyramid, funding their mansion and luxury cars with the stolen retirements of dozens of helpless grandmothers and grandfathers. But weeks earlier, a group of suspicious investors had retained legal counsel, demanding an immediate clawback of their initial capital and threatening a federal investigation. My parents were facing a devastating shortfall, exactly $165,000 short of the hush money required to quiet the lead whistleblowers and delay the collapse of their criminal empire. They had looked at my daughter's rare book collection not as a sentimental treasure, but as a quick, untraceable source of liquid capital to bury the evidence of their financial crimes. The sheer depravity of their choice settled deep into my stomach, hardening into an icy, unyielding fury that completely erased any remaining shred of familial loyalty. They had stolen from a child to hide the fact that they were preying on the elderly, believing that their status as my parents made them completely untouchable. I spent the next 48 hours compiling the evidence, utilizing my professional accounting network to trace the exact identity of the private antiquarian book broker who had purchased the collection. Through a highly respected colleague at the university archives, I discovered that the books had been sold to a wealthy, legitimate collector named Alastair Vance, located in a historic district downtown. I contacted Mr. Vance immediately, presenting him with the original estate inventory signed by my father-in-law before his death, along with the documentation proving the books were a direct gift to Catherine. Mr. Vance was a man of immense integrity, completely horrified to learn that he had inadvertently purchased stolen property from a pair of desperate financial criminals. "I don't want any part in a family crime, Renee," Mr. Vance told me over the phone, his voice filled with deep professional respect. "I have placed the entire collection in our secure vault, and it will not be moved." I immediately wired him the $165,000 from my own private, untouched corporate severance savings, reclaiming the collection legally to avoid any complex custody disputes. With the books safely secured, I turned the full force of my forensic accounting ledger directly toward the destruction of my parents' criminal enterprise. I printed out the complete, airtight paper trail of the multi-level marketing scam, documenting every fraudulent transfer, every hidden escrow account, and the exact names of the elderly victims they had ruined. I bound the evidence into a heavy, black leather corporate binder, attached my official professional affidavit, and drove directly to the regional office of federal fraud investigators. I slid the binder across the desk to the lead federal agent, a cold, unyielding woman who recognized the mathematical perfection of my work within 5 minutes of scanning the pages. "This isn't just an anonymous tip, Ms. Caldwell," the agent said, looking up at me with an expression of intense professional admiration. "This is a complete, ironclad federal indictment on a silver platter. We will initiate the asset forfeiture and arrest protocols before the week is over," she added, closing the binder with a heavy, definitive snap. I walked out of the federal building as the first autumn snow began to fall, knowing that the house of cards my parents had built on a foundation of pure cruelty was about to face a total collapse. The legal fallout descended upon Richard and Eleanor on a Friday morning with the inexorable force of a physical sledgehammer. Federal agents, accompanied by local law enforcement, arrived at their upscale mansion with a swarm of marked vehicles, executing immediate arrest warrants and asset forfeiture orders. The neighbors gathered on the manicured sidewalks, watching in absolute shock as my arrogant parents were led down their front steps in silver handcuffs, their faces pale with terror. The federal government immediately froze every single one of their bank accounts, seized their luxury vehicles, and initiated bank foreclosure proceedings on the mansion that had been funded by stolen retirements. The reality of their situation slammed into them with brutal force, and within 24 hours, the arrogance they had displayed at the dining room table vanished entirely. Because they had no access to their stolen funds, they were forced to rely on a public defender, a young lawyer who looked completely overwhelmed by the mountain of forensic evidence I had provided. That was when the desperate phone calls and the false pleas for family unity began, routed through the secure lines of the county jail facility. "Renee, you have to save us," my mother wept into the phone, her voice cracking with a hysterical, weaponized desperation that no longer had any power over my heart. "We are your flesh and blood, your own parents. If you don't withdraw your professional affidavit and tell the investigators that the financial data was a simple accounting mistake, your father and I will spend our remaining years in a federal prison. Think about the family name, Renee. Think about how this will affect Catherine's reputation when she grows up and realizes her grandparents were convicts. We only took those books because we were desperate to save the family from ruin. We were going to give them back. We swear to you that we were." I sat at my kitchen desk, listening to her cries while looking through the glass window at Catherine, who was happily reading a book in our sun-filled garden. "You didn't care about the family name when you walked into my daughter's bedroom and stripped her shelves bare to fund your hush money payments," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and entirely free of anger. "You didn't care about the family legacy when you were draining the life savings of elderly retirees who trusted you with their futures. You spent decades training me to accept your abuse in the name of loyalty, but my loyalty belongs to the child I brought into this world, not to the criminals who gave me birth." The conversation ended as I quietly pressed the disconnect button, the frantic screams of my mother cut off by a single, clean beep that left the room in absolute peace. They tried to utilize their remaining social contacts, sending distant acquaintances to knock on my door and accuse me of destroying my parents' health over a collection of old paper. I didn't argue, and I didn't engage in emotional debates. I simply emailed those contacts the digital file showing my parents' predatory MLM contracts targeting local grandmothers. The social circle vanished overnight, leaving Richard and Eleanor to face the true, unyielding weight of federal criminal prosecution in absolute isolation. The final confrontation occurred 6 months later inside a quiet, sterile federal courtroom during their sentencing hearing. My parents sat at the defense table, looking incredibly old, withered, and completely broken, stripped of the luxury suits and expensive jewelry that had once defined their pride. The judge looked down from his high bench, his voice echoing through the quiet courtroom as he delivered a blistering lecture on the pure depravity of preying on the elderly and stealing from children. He sentenced Richard and Eleanor to 12 years in a maximum security federal facility, ordering the immediate liquidation of all their remaining seized property to pay restitution to their victims. As the bailiff stepped forward to lead them away to the transport vehicles, my father turned around, his eyes locking onto mine with a burning, desperate bitterness. "You ruined us, Renee," he hissed, his voice trembling as the chains around his wrists rattled loudly in the quiet room. "You traded your own parents for a stack of useless books and a child's hobby. I hope you're happy with what your cold heart did to this family." I stood up from the wooden bench, my posture upright, my expression completely serene as I looked at the broken man who had never understood the true value of anything. "Reality didn't ruin you, Richard," I replied, my voice carrying a strange, chilling peace that silenced his anger completely. "The consequences of your own choices simply caught up with you, and you are finally paying the bill." I walked out of the courtroom, leaving the ghosts of my past behind in the shadows, stepping into the warm spring sunlight where my daughter was waiting for me in the car. We drove home through the quiet streets, the city coming alive with the vibrant green leaves of a new season, a perfect symbol of the clean slate we had earned. That evening, I sat on the plush rug of our sun-filled living room, watching Catherine prepare a special conservation workspace on the white oak coffee table. Mr. Vance had personally delivered the 32 rare books back to our house weeks earlier, along with a beautifully crafted set of professional archivist tools as a gift for Catherine's dedication. She wore her crisp white cotton gloves, her small face focused with an intense, beautiful concentration as she used a delicate horsehair brush to dust the spine of an 1802 volume of poetry. The house around us was filled with the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock, the rich scent of old leather, and the absolute safety of a home where no boundaries would ever be violated again. Catherine looked up from her work, a bright, genuine smile spreading across her face as she looked at the beautifully filled shelves lining the room. "Thank you for bringing them home, Mommy," she said softly, her eyes shining with a deep, mature respect that was worth more to me than all the wealth in the corporate world. I smiled, leaning forward to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, my heart filled with a profound, unshakable sense of peace. People always say that home is where your family is, a beautiful, sentimental phrase that you see printed on cheap decorative items and commercial greeting cards. But as I sit in my quiet, protected sanctuary, watching my daughter study the art of preservation, I have learned a much deeper, more permanent truth. Home isn't a geographic location defined by a shared surname, a genetic code, or the obligation to endure emotional abuse in the name of blood loyalty. Home is where your boundaries are treated as sacred, where your hard work is honored, where the future of children is fiercely protected, and above all else, home is where you are respected.